for coming to this session. I get the fun part of the presentation. I get to talk about technology. And I'm a technology person. My entire career has been in software development and startups here in Connecticut. Before we get to technology, the fun stuff, I want to take us back to when the automobile industry first started thinking about autonomous vehicles. And I got a short little movie here from 1956. Predicting 2000.
Long day, 11 to 3, 2 hours for lunch, 3 days a week. It's a tough life.
You'll notice it's complete distracted driving right now. And they're not looking at their phones, they're playing a card game.
Number WJK-412.
I did 3 high, 3 no trump.
And there's FaceTime.
Do you mind if I pass?
That's certainly not. Go right ahead.
Thanks.
And there's your flying car. So, in 1956, this little video gave us the Jetsons about 10 years later and talked about this idea of automation, that everything would be automated, that technology was going to solve every problem that we could possibly throw at it, and the world was going to be, elevated highways, flying cars, and push-button meals. So we're not quite there yet. However, as Mad from the old Palmolive commercials used to say, you're soaking in it. We are soaking in autonomy right now. The technology that is going to be used in the future of fully driverless cars, and I'll thank Eric for giving us the different levels of autonomy that are out there, are being deployed right now just in ways that you don't quite realize it. So I'm going to just skip past this one. Eric already covered the different levels of automation. So here's where we are today. How many people use cell phones to navigate from point A to point B? So whether it's Google, WAZE, Apple, it's built into your car, there are these maps. And as time has progressed since they were first introduced about 2009, 2010, they've gotten better and better. In fact, they've gotten to a point where they can predict what the traffic will be before you even hit the road. And the way that they're doing that is through the technology base of artificial intelligence, which I will more commonly refer to as AI, and learning what the traffic movements are on our roads, and figuring out what the past history has been and predicting what the future loads on the roads, the speeds on our roads, how many cars are on the roads, and so on. That is the underpinning to a fully driverless vehicle, because the ability for a car to navigate isn't just being able to identify objects and avoid them. It's also about taking you from point A to point B. And that is kind of the base framework of where some of this technology starts with. So how are they doing it? How is it that last night, when I typed in the address onto my phone of this facility, and then scrolled to say what time I was leaving, they didn't know it was only going to take me an hour and 15 minutes to get here when I left at 7 o'clock this morning? So we have another movie. So this explainer came out in 2017, and the technology, the predictive analysis technology with big data is even better than back then. So it's not just Google that's doing this. It's AT&T, it's Verizon, it's Sprint, and T-Mobile. I think they're merging together. And as our cars now are integrated with LTE or cellular service and Wi-Fi within it, all of those little pings that the cars are doing and the phones are doing are going to all the towers that are all around us, and the carriers, the tech companies, and soon the public service agencies will be able to know in real time, at scale, what's happening on any road in any environment. This map that I just put up is the real-time traffic map. Everything in red indicates that you're not going to go very fast for the city of Boston. And Boston has invested a great deal in the infrastructure of being able to allow the tech companies to keep track of this stuff. So, what other types of technology are in autonomous vehicles? So there are three types of visioning systems that are used for an autonomous vehicle to be able to figure out where it is, where it's going, and how to avoid hitting objects. The first is a camera. I think everyone's pretty much familiar with that. Having cameras looking out at the world allows a vast amount of data to be collected and processed to determine what's going on there. Eric mentioned a little bit earlier about LIDAR. LIDAR has the ability to see things underground or through inclement weather and things like that. And the last one is radar, which we also are familiar with in terms of weather maps, talking about storm systems that are coming in and everything. Each one of these is used in various autonomous vehicle manufacturers that have banked on, well, this is going to solve the technology problem. This is going to make our vehicles be able to operate on the roads better. But as it turns out, you kind of need all three. And the reason why is, here's LIDAR. It gives us a very nice view of every object that's on there, but it's very data intensive, it's costly to implement, and you have to process what that data is. Well, here's radar. That'll give us a good idea of where some objects are, but it doesn't really tell us a lot of data, but it's fast and it's cheap and it's easily available in vehicles. And then here's cameras. This is from a Tesla automobile. It's a live video feed, and they're using onboard processing to process what the car is seeing and then making some predictions about what should happen next by watching both the driver and what's happening external to the vehicle. So that brings us to one of the big questions with all of this. If there's all this data floating around, what's happening in the vehicle, how many vehicles are on the road, where they're going and all that, where's the data going? And that becomes a big policy question. One, when you have a bunch of vehicles that are sending out all these signals, then it becomes a very congested area for your airwaves. And if you remember the old broadcast TVs that were broadcasting signals over the air, or even with FM or AM radio, there could be conflicts if everyone's on the same frequency. So those are big technological obstacles that haven't been solved yet. They're being tested, they're being piloted, but most communities in America do not have the right infrastructure for being able to accommodate this massive influx of data that will be generated by these cars. And just to give you an idea of what we're talking about multi-terabytes of data every second that's being generated off of an autonomous vehicle. This is 8th Avenue in New York City, right outside the Google headquarters. New York has permitted a private company to put kiosks out on the sidewalks that are essentially towers that are collecting data but also providing a service. And part of that service is not really a mobility as a service. It's more along the lines of free public Wi-Fi, directions, emergency alerts, and charging stations. But the tech community tends to like to figure out what problems are out there and how you can monetize a solution once you figured out the technology part. So when we start thinking about vehicles that are on the road that are generating a lot of data, where those collector points are going to be, where those beacons are going to be received, becomes an important issue from public policy side of who has the right to sidewalks, who has the right to public infrastructure, and where does that line get drawn in terms of who owns the data that's being generated on public roads. Is it the private company? Is it the municipality? Is it the state? Is it something else? So these are some of the policy issues that derive from where we're talking about the technology. So infrastructure. Even if we had autonomous vehicles that were fully autonomous, we would have a hard time figuring out how they could operate in our current infrastructure. Here's a typical office building. The entrance to the office building is through the garage. Navigating within a building is just yet another layer that an autonomous vehicle would have to adapt to. And also, it kind of begs the question, well, why would you want to drive in an autonomous vehicle and park in a garage? Wouldn't you rather be dropped off and have the car then park itself? And if it was going to park itself, why would it have to be on site? Why couldn't it be off site? So these are all the types of questions that autonomous vehicles generate that we don't really have good answers for. We have existing infrastructure, we have existing land use policy, but we don't really understand what is going to change as a result of the introduction of some of these things. We certainly did not anticipate, from a land use standpoint, that when everybody had access to real-time traffic information and were given the opportunity for real-time dynamic routing, that roads that were primarily residential and not used to a lot of traffic would suddenly see a lot of traffic as people suddenly said, oh, I can shave off 3 minutes if I take these back roads that I didn't know about and get to my destination a little bit faster. So from a public policy side, we have to address or grapple with, well, what happens when everybody has access to whatever road that they want to take and the roads are not really designed for high-frequency vehicles. That's a problem that's happening now. We don't even have to wait for autonomous vehicles to hit. One of the things that we don't really think about from an autonomy standpoint when we talk about autonomous vehicles is that the movement of people, goods, and services also includes goods. And this is another New York scene. This is outside an office building. This is the deliveries from one truck into the building. These are all packages going to a variety of people that work in those offices. And the proliferation of that on-demand lifestyle of being able to order something and have it delivered within the next hour or the end of the day or the next morning has changed how people are being, vehicles or delivery companies are using our public roads. They need access to the curb to unload the packages. The sidewalks are not designed to be a storage facility for or temporary use of a bunch of packages. And because it's a private sector market on the delivery side, we have multiple delivery companies and new ones sprouting up every single day. They're attempting to deliver packages. And it's not just packages. It's also food delivery, lunches, et cetera, et cetera. It has scaled the problem of how all these services need to compete for the same curb space or the sidewalk space of our pedestrians and also our vehicles. So we attempt to regulate these things by coming up with signs. Well, an autonomous vehicle would have a hard time figuring this out, and I would have to argue a human would have a hard time figuring this one out too. We have existing problems, so the technology people like to try and solve these problems. The policy people like to solve them by putting up signs, but when you get conflicting information, which is kind of the dilemma that a lot of autonomous technology has, what do? What is the right law that you're supposed to observe, and are you going to spend enough time reading through everything to figure that stuff out? Then there's rideshare. Now, a lot of municipalities are having a big problem with rideshare right now, and what's been in the news recently is the issues with airports, and this is a scene from an airport where people are expecting that they can use their phone, get their ride selected, and that they'll be able to waltz out of the terminal and catch their ride. But this is the reality. When hundreds of people are expecting to get their ride immediately, the Uber cars that are circling around trying to get to them are now creating traffic jams and traffic congestion. So some port authorities are trying to move those pick-up and drop-off zones away from the terminals. The consumer says, why should I have to walk any farther than I have to? I just came off a plane. I want to hop in my ride. Why can't I have it there? These are really interesting problems that have emerged as the technology has led the rideshare industry to expand rapidly. And again, who owns the data? The rideshare companies know more about the usage of the airport facilities than sometimes the people that run the airports. Only this spring, the Port Authority of New York had to admit that after they build all these new garages, the number of cars that are parking there is less than they predicted because everybody's taking rideshare and not parking their cars when they take a flight out of LaGuardia or JFK. Parking lots. So when a business is open, the parking lots are generally full. But most of the time, the business is closed, and this is what the parking lots look like. That's a lot of land value that is not being captured in its most efficient way. So as we start shifting our behaviors because of autonomous technology, whether it's we don't need to go to work because we can telecommute, we don't need to own a car because we just need to get to our commute distance back and forth. As we solve all these problems, we're going to free up a lot of land. And those are issues that we have to look at as we start talking about, do we invest public monies into developing more garages when the trend lines say that people will park less because there's going to be other solutions that are out there. But here's the big thing. Autonomous policy isn't just about cars. It's about some other things, too, that we're not necessarily thinking about, but these things are happening now. And it's not just about roads. This is a pizza delivery vehicle that's operating in Houston right now. It's a partnership with Domino's. It's not running on the roads. It's running on sidewalks. Now, if you follow the whole scooter issue where people were riding electric scooters on the sidewalks, a lot of people said, well, we don't want these things on the sidewalks. But as new services and new ideas of services are taking root because the technology is enabling those pilots or those experiments to happen, it is changing the way private companies are using our public assets. Drones, UPS, Amazon, FedEx, they've all filed patents on how they're going to deliver packages in the future via drone. So if we thought figuring out what's happening on our roads and sidewalks was bad enough, we're also going to have to deal with airspace because There's certainly a faster way to get from point A to point B in a congested city if you don't have to be on the road or on the sidewalk and just fly, 20 or 30 feet above the ground. And then this is kind of an outlier. There is a ship that left England that is traversing the Atlantic Ocean. It is a fully autonomous ship. So there is nobody on board it, and it is just navigating itself, and it's called the Mayflower, which I think was a clever name for it. So marine autonomy is also something that is not necessarily impacting our roads or cars. So how does this all fit into the direction for Connecticut and the Connecticut Autonomous Task Force? So we're going to try and look at three things. We're going to try and study and produce a paper for the legislature on the subject of data, who owns it, who's using it, what should be done about it, where is it stored across the board. Infrastructure, how is our existing infrastructure going to adapt to the new reality of autonomous technology, not just vehicles, and then the liability and regulatory issues, whether it's from the usage of the roads or insurance and so on. There are lots of questions. These are big, big buckets for us to look at, and we will attempt to do our best on trying to look at all of these, but the conversation about all of these issues is going to be an ongoing one, and the technology is changing rapidly enough that whatever we think is going to happen or our recommendation could be completely blown out of the water by something new that comes along that we hadn't really known about. So, mobility as a service. As it turns out, the state of Florida wants to beat Arizona and Nevada as being the state that has the most interesting AV technology and services. So they recently have introduced a whole bunch of new laws that basically allow any technology company to operate some sort of AV pilot in the state of Florida. So, okay. What does that mean? Well, there was some political ads saying that was a bad idea. There were some political ads saying that was a good idea. But what's interesting is that the AV companies or the technology companies, well, they're actually warming up to this. So here's the future of mobility as a service with an autonomous vehicle that's operating exclusively in the Villages. It's a retirement community outside of Tampa Bay. They just announced that they thought that this was a great site to run a slow speed vehicle as an on-demand service for a population of retirees that would need that option of mobility, and they're operating today. The people that do insurance actuaries have also released a report. They released it about a week ago, and in that report, they're basically saying that the promise of a fully autonomous vehicle, Wonderland, is still far away. However, they have seen the pivot of the tech companies, now understanding that they are going to be introducing very rapidly what we would call driver-assistive technologies as quickly as possible on a path towards market adoption. So what are those things? It's the blind spot monitoring in vehicles. It's the adaptive cruise control in vehicles. And a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with cars, but it will affect the way people use our roads and our public infrastructure. And that's all I have. This is my contact information. Thank you very much.